Hi, this is Rabbi Chaim Coffman. Welcome to our 16th installment of the Torah portion of the week. This week's Parsha is Parshas Bashalach. As we know, or if you don't know, you'll know now, Parsha is about the Jewish people coming out of Egypt and the Egyptians dying as the Jews cross the sea. They get through, the water turns to dry land for them, and as they get across, Moshe Rabbeinu waves up his staff, and the waters close over the Egyptians die. They sing shiur. They sing the song of the sea that we say every day, thanking God that, they were saved, etc. And they go on their way in the desert, on the way to Mount Sinai in order to accept the Torah. So there's quite a bit of things going on here. I wanted to actually, just speak a little bit about the beginning of the Parsha, and see, at least what the beginning is and what's going on. So the beginning of the Parsha, Parshas Bashalach, starts chapter 13, verse 17. It said, "It happened when Pharaoh sent out the people that God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines." Why? Because it was near. For God said, perhaps the people will reconsider when they see a war, they will return to Egypt. So therefore, God turned the people toward the way of the wilderness, to the sea of reeds. And as we know, they're going to go to the Sea of Reeds, and it's going to be a miracle that the sea is going to split, and the Egyptians are going to run after them, and then God is going to destroy them. God is going to destroy them through the covering of the waters, and they all drown. Right? So it's an interesting question, obviously, that has to be asked, and is that if the beginning of the Parsha says that God's going to take them out, and He's going to take them out in this way, right? He's going to take them out in this direction. God is afraid, as the Torah says, God's afraid that if He leads them close to the Philistines, they may make war, right? And the Jewish people will be afraid. They want to go back to Egypt, right? Perhaps the people, because the Philistines were near, God's going to say the people will reconsider when they see a war, and they're going to want to return. So the obvious question is, why? Why in the world would they consider returning to Egypt if, after all, they were enslaved, their lives were made bitter, right? A tremendous amount of suffering that went on in Egypt itself. And they were there for a long time. God takes them out at the last second so they don't get spiritually destroyed, because they reached the last level of impurity. Otherwise, they would have gone to oblivion spiritually. Nonetheless, God takes them out, and He says that He's going to take them out, but He wants to turn them in, send them in a different direction, because unless they go back. So the obvious questions we mentioned is, what in the world are they going back to? Why would they want to go back? Oh, it's so much better in Egypt. Well, don't you remember? You got physically destroyed, right? They tried to destroy you physically. They tried to destroy you spiritually. God has to take you out against your will. You come out at a certain time. Otherwise, you would have disappeared. There would be no Jewish people today. Be that as it may, they still would have considered, God says, to go back. So there are a number of approaches here. See what's going on. First, we'll look at the Rabbeinu B'chai. The Rabbeinu B'chai says that the whole idea of the Jewish people going into the desert. Keep in mind, when they were in Egypt, they still had all their needs being met, even if they were, being abused and being persecuted. They had food, right? They had water. As we'll see in the book of Numbers, they complain. They say, when they were in the desert for a while, going around wherever, God wanted them to go. And they complain, they say, oh, the fish. Remember the fish we had in Egypt. Oh, the watermelon. Look what we had in Egypt. You're talking about the generations saw God face to face, right? Whether it was only for the first of the 10 Commandments, whether it was all of the 10 Commandments, nonetheless, they saw God face to face on the mountain. Greatest generation in the history of man. And they were missing watermelon. They were missing fish. This great generation, very hard to understand. Very simply, we could explain that if they had everything in Egypt, their needs, to a certain extent, were taken care of, right? They had food, they had water, etc., even though they were suffering. Nonetheless, what do they have in the desert? They're going to go in the desert. They don't have anything. We don't see an oasis. We don't see, fruit trees or whatever. They're in the desert. When you're in the desert, there's nothing there. Sand and more sand. And you look out to the right, sand. Left, sand. Straight ahead, sand. You don't see anything else. Right? No trees. How are they going to survive? Looks much better, as you're traveling in the desert. Certainly looks much better to, go back. Even though they suffered. Because what do they have in the desert? Even if God's going to support them and they're going to have to reach a high spiritual level to live in the desert, they complained a number of times, Moshe, what'd you do? You brought us to a desert to die. It was so much better in Egypt. No, it wasn't so much better. They understood that they suffered and what they went through. But at the same time, they had their basic necessities met. Right? Remember, Egypt was the world power, commerce, trade. They had money now. Right? Everything was given to them by the Egyptians. They took all their wealth. They could come back and reestablish themselves. Right? It would have been totally different. Alright, so there is what to think about them going back. Says Rabbi Chaim. Rabbi Chaim says you should surely know that the fact that Jewish people were in the desert, everything was a test. Everything was a firm test in order that they should raise their level in emunah and bitachon, right? And belief in God. They should work on their belief in God and strengthen their belief in God, so that that's why they go in the desert. What's the purpose? In other words, God sends them to a place, there's no food, there's no water, there's no anything. So Rabbi Chaim says the whole purpose was to strengthen their emunah, to strengthen their belief in God, in order that they become so strong in their belief that they'll be able to accept the Torah. And that's why God splits the sea. Even with them in it, He splits it. And they go through, they see that miracle, that the Egyptians get killed. So the whole thing, Rabbeinu Bachai says, was a test. Now, keep in mind what happened before. What happened before was, go back a few chapters. Remember, there were miracles that occurred. There were plagues. That the Egyptian society was decimated. Blood, frogs, vermin, hail, wild animals. Right? The last one killing the firstborn, and then they let them out. But they saw all the miracles. If they witnessed all the miracles, why does God have to work on their emunah and bitachon? Why does God have to test them? Right? It is a test. As Rabbeinu Bachai says. Because the Torah says, if you look at chapter 47 verse 28, it says God is testing them. Right? How is He testing them? He brings them out to the desert. So it is a test. What about the plagues? What about the plagues? It wasn't a test. They didn't have enough emunah. They didn't have enough belief in God. They were strong enough to get the Torah. Keep in mind, they were slaves. God has to work on their emunah. God has to work on them to be a nation in order to accept Him as king. Be that as it may, even seeing all the miracles, and witnessing what happened to the Egyptians, we know that that wasn't enough to get them out of Egypt. Right? Because we saw that God says, I'm going to show my might in the world through these plagues. The whole question was, were the plagues specifically for the Egyptians? Were they for the Jewish nation? Were they for both? We see that God wanted to show the world His power, especially to the Egyptians. Right? So the plagues, a number of them were for their sake. In other words, they're going to see God's power. They're going to witness it. The world will hear of my power. But there are other plagues that God gives for the sake of the Jewish people, to show how God runs the world. God's above nature. God's outside of nature. God can change things. That made a tremendous impression. Keep in mind, when they leave, or right before they leave, Moshe Rabbeinu has one last test for them. God says. God tells them through Moshe that they have to take a lamb and they have to kill it in front of the Egyptians, put the blood on each doorpost, and then God is going to pass over, right, the house of the Jews and smite the Egyptians, right? We're talking about the firstborn. Now, obviously, the people don't want to do this. They don't want to do it because the sheep is one of the Egyptian gods. So how in the world can they kill their God in front of them and still live? Moshe Rabbeinu says, wow, it's a great question. But you know what? It doesn't matter. Because God says if you don't do it, you don't put the blood on your lintel, on your doorpost, you don't get out of Egypt. Look at what they went through. Look at how much they suffered. Look at all the miracles God is doing now. One after another. Bam, bam, bam. What happens? God says, wow, you see my power? You see my might? It's not enough. You can forget that I exist, right? The verse in Deuteronomy says that you shouldn't forsake me. You shouldn't think you did things by yourself, through the work of your hands, and forget me. So obviously, they're not going to forget God because they see that they've seen the miracles. They've witnessed the miracles. Still, God wants to make sure their belief in Him is complete. So God says, I want to see how much you're willing to do for me. Look what I've done for you up until now. Yes, I put you there. Yes, I made you suffer there. Right? There were different reasons that you had to go through this. Right? But now you're at the final test. Now you've seen all my glory. What I've done. Right? The last plague is going to be the slaying of the firstborn. And once the firstborn is slayed, all of them, Pharaoh's going to let you go. So that's very nice, except I have one more special thing for you to do before you leave. And that is you have to kill the sheep in front of the Egyptians. Now to them, that's like an impossibility. Imagine you have a whole nation steeped in idolatry. You go to India today, what do you take with you? You take a barbecue. You take a barbecue, and say, okay, where are the cows? Like, let's go, I'm ready for burgers, steak. And they're going to look at you like, what, are you kidding? You can't, this cow is holy. You can't kill him. I don't know. God told me that, I have to make burgers, right? And I have to make, I have to have steak. Each house has to have 3 steaks tonight for dinner. And you have to take some of the blood and put it on the lintel, because something terrible is going to happen. They're going to say, "Are you kidding? This is holy, whatever." It says, "Doesn't matter. Give me the cow." Got my big knife. Dinner time. Let's go. They'd be scared out of their mind to do such a thing. But it's what God told them to do. And that's what they had to do. They had to show another level of Mesiras Nefesh. They had to show another level of giving themselves over to God, being subservient to Him for what purpose? In order to be able to accept the Torah. So God gives them that test, and then sends them to the desert. Desert's going to be another test, because there's going to be no food, no water, and God is going to take care of them with the man, with a special manna that falls from heaven, and that's going to substantiate and satiate them for all their needs, right? At least for their physical needs. Now, the thing about the man, which came every day, a double portion came on Friday, right? They weren't allowed to go out and collect it. That was forbidden because of carrying. So Torah says, we'll see specifically that you're not allowed to go out and bring it in. So they got a double portion. And the double portion would cover you through Shabbos. Now keep in mind, just because you got manna today, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get it tomorrow. And if you got it tomorrow, it doesn't mean you're going to get it the next day. Right? But this occurred on a daily basis. They had no more food left. They had to work on their emunah b'tachon in God. Right? Their belief in Him and what He's able to do. So God set up this system in order to work on their belief in Him so that they'll be more ready to accept the Torah. So explains the Rabbeinu Bachai. Comes along Rabbi Yerucham. Rabbi Yerucham, the famous spiritual guide of the Mir Yeshiva in Europe of the last generation. He writes in his book Das Torah on the Parsha, and he says that how could it be that the Jews coming out, even if they would go close to the Philistines, and that they would come to war against them, how could it be they would have regret coming out of Egypt? Right? Why in the world would they have regret? Not only that, but he asks, if everything's known to God, God knows past, present, and future. So if He knows the future, doesn't He know that they could be afraid because of this? I mean, obviously He does. So if He does, why put them through this? Right? You could ask, if God really knows that, why does He mention specific reasons for this? God doesn't have to give reasons. He could just say, I'm going to send them this way, a roundabout way, and that's it. He doesn't have to give a reason. Right? He's God. He can do whatever He wants. He wants to send them that way, fine. Why? Who cares? Not our business. We want to know. We're curious. What's the reason you're doing this? So God could say, go take a long walk off a short pier. I'm not going to answer you. I have to answer to you. You who I created, I have to give you an explanation? No, I don't think so. God throws us a bone. Right? What's the bone over here? God gives us a reason. Right? He gives us a reason for why He's doing it. And the reason is, so if they go close to them, they may declare war. Very nice. He doesn't normally give reasons for things. Torah say, do this, don't do that. Do this. If you do this, it's called an abomination. If you do that, you get long life. Doesn't explain why. We don't get explanations. Honor your father and your mother, the Ten Commandments says, and you get long life. What does it mean, long life? I'm going to live to 150? 200? We know that a person lives only to 120. Does it mean long life in this world? No. Right? It means in the next world. Right? If you honored your parents properly in this world, which is an extremely difficult thing to do, if we do it properly, you get long life. So that you might say, okay, parents brought you into this world, you have certain obligations, to them, when they're alive, after they die, right? There are obligations. So you might say, well, I could have figured that out. That's a pretty important thing, right? The only other mitzvah that we're told about that says you'll get long life is by the mitzvah of shiur haken, sending away the mother bird and taking the eggs. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You shoo away the mother bird. The mother bird's hovering over the eggs. You shoo away the mother bird, and you take the eggs. You can eat the eggs. Right? Again, it depends how far along they are. But we're not going to get into the mitzvah of shiur haken here. But the idea is, you shoo away the mother bird, all things being equal, you take the eggs, and you get a long life. So the whole discussion what that long life means. Mean this world, mean the next world. Can't mean this world. Can't mean this world because the Talmud says, Schar mitzvah b'chayim maleka. The merit of doing a mitzvah, in this world, there is none. Leka, there is. That's what it says, there is. Here is, that's what it means. Leka means there is not, sorry. There will not be. So if you don't get merit in this world for doing the mitzvah, then it can't mean long life in this world. It must mean the merit of doing the mitzvah in the next world. That's where Elisha ben Abuya, or is known as Acher, made a mistake. When he saw a child who his father told him to do shiur haken, he climbs up a ladder and he shoots away the mother bird. He falls down the ladder and he dies. Falls off the ladder and dies. So Elisha ben Abuya says, he's got two things here. He's doing kibbut up. He's honoring his father, listening to his father. And he's doing the mitzvah shiur haken. Right? Or push away the mother bird, taking the eggs. But he fell down and he died. So Elisha ben Abuya was on the Sanhedrin. Right? He was on the Sanhedrin. When he saw this, he couldn't fathom. He couldn't fathom why this happened. Two mitzvahs, long life, why is he dying now? So, the Talmud says he didn't understand simple explanation of the verse. When the verse said it means long life, it can't mean this world. You have to understand that Elisha ben Abuya is a Tana. Member of the Sanhedrin, not a dummy. Tremendous, tremendous rabbinic scholar. And because of this, and he made a mistake, and he didn't understand what the verse meant properly, he becomes a heretic. He's a famed teacher of Rebbe Meir, and he basically becomes a heretic. So, it's not such a simple story. I'm not going to go into detail about it because I want to get back to this. But the idea is that God doesn't normally tell you why things are done, says Rabbi Yerucham. All of a sudden, God says, I'm going to send them in this direction because of this reason. It's not normal. Right? It's not the normal way, verses are written in the Torah. We don't normally get explanations. Sometimes we do, but in general we don't. So Rabbi Yerucham asks, if God already knows the future, why tell us? Why tell us now? He knew that could possibly happen. So if he knew that it could happen, why does it need to be repeated here? So says the Rabbi Yerucham, he says, I mentioned this idea many times. If you go through what I wrote in the book of Exodus, etc., I mentioned this many times. In the book of Genesis as well. That what does God do? God is a tremendous amount of chesed. Right? God is a tremendous amount of wanting to do good for others. So what does God do? So many times he will give advice to man so that they can prevent themselves from sinning, from doing things that are wrong. One example is Bilam, famous non-Jewish prophet. When he's going with the people of Moab, with the leaders of Moab, it says in the book of Numbers, chapter 22, verse 22, an angel comes to him on the way. Right? What angel? So Rashi says an angel of Rachamim, an angel of compassion. And he wanted to prevent him from sinning so he wouldn't sin and be destroyed. In other words, he wanted to warn him. What are you doing? Didn't God say not to go with these people? It's not a good thing. He's trying to prevent them from sinning. So God gave us the ability to guard ourselves against this. In other words, the evil inclination, what does the evil inclination want to do? Evil inclination wants you to do terrible things. Wants you to go against Torah. But you also have a good inclination. You have a good inclination to help others, to want to help others, to do mitzvahs, to learn, to give over to others. There are plenty of mitzvahs that we can do to try and offset our evil inclination. Evil inclination doesn't rest, not even while you're sleeping. They always have to constantly fight it. Nonetheless, God gives you the ability, and we're the only ones that can do this because we're given a soul. And the soul gives us the ability to distinguish and make decisions. Animals can't do that. They're just programmed DNA. Right? They only have the animalistic soul. That's it. But when God gave us our souls, the Torah says He breathed in the spirit of life. Aramaic translation says He gave us the ability to speak. Right? The ability to speak means to reason. Means to make decisions. Hopefully making the right decision. We don't always make the right decision, but He gives us the ability to do so. Says Rabbi Yerucham, God had a tremendous amount of compassion. He puts us in a position where we can guard ourselves from doing bad. So therefore, what does that have to do with us here? So he says, when they were traveling on the way, when they came out of Egypt, and they're going to go the way of the Plishtim, of the Philistines, they're going to have a tremendous amount of trials and tribulations on the way. Maybe if they get too close, they're going to want to give everything up. They're going to say, we can't do this. If we go too close, what that's going to do is, they may attack us. They're not ready for war. Per se, we'll see in the next verse shortly. They're not necessarily ready for war. They don't want to fight against anyone. They've been beaten down so much, they just want to be left alone. God says, you're going to come serve me, you're going to come to the mountain, etc. Fine, let them be free. Why, put them in a position where they could get attacked? And if they get attacked, right, it means physically, but it could also mean that if they get attacked physically, what could happen is they could lose their faith in God altogether. You tell me, greatest generation ever created. They saw God face to face shortly thereafter, but they saw all the miracles. They saw the miracles in Egypt, saw all the plagues, saw the firstborn die, killed their God in front of them, became absolutely wealthy coming out, cleaned out Egypt, and everything that Moshe said happened. Where's the regret? Where are these strange thoughts going to be? Where are they going to come from? So again, they've been through a tremendously traumatic experience. Inside Egypt and now coming out. They go across the sea closes, kills all the Egyptians. Extremely traumatic. That being the case, you put them in a trial where they get close to a nation, that nation may attack them. They may lose faith altogether. Were they on the level to be able to withstand it? That's the question. According to this, says Rabbi Yerucham, if they would get too close, it would enter them other thoughts. Meaning, lack of belief in God. And each transgression would cause you to do other transgressions, etc., until they wouldn't be able to stand up to the test anymore. They're in the desert. They want to go back. They want to go back to what they knew. And again, that would make sense because they had money now. They're going back totally different. It's the main, it's the main place in the world to do commerce. So they can start all over. It makes a lot of sense. They may want to go back. So therefore, what does God do? God makes them go in a roundabout way in the desert in order that the trials and tribulations are much lighter. But they're going to be in the desert and they're going to be fed miraculously day in and day out. It's also a trial. Right? But God wanted to minimize the trials. Because if he didn't minimize the trials, then they wouldn't be able to survive. And therefore, they would want to go back to Egypt. So what's the message? So Rabbi Yerucham says the message for us is that the way God deals with people and how he rules the world, that what does he want from us? He wants us to do good. He wants us to succeed. So he puts us in a position to distance ourselves from our evil inclination and trials and tribulations. That's the point. He gives us the ability to make the right decision. Now, we have to make the right decision. If we don't make the right decision, we fail. Right? Doesn't mean you can't do tshuva. Doesn't mean you can't pick yourself up. But you make the wrong decision, you fail. So he gives us that ability. So God says, yeah, I could have gone in a straighter path. But if I go in a straighter path, that may cause them to lose faith. That may cause them to want to go back to Egypt, even though it's very difficult to fathom they would want to go back. But nonetheless, their faith could be broken even after seeing all the miracles, and therefore God sends them in a roundabout way in order to minimize the ability to transgress. And that in and of itself is an amazing thing. Because he put into the world this idea that we can guard ourselves from that. It's not impossible. Right? People say, I make mistakes about speaking about other people and all the laws and this and that. It's too hard. Rabbi Chaim said, you're not allowed, it's not that you're not allowed to speak, you have to know how to speak. Even if you make mistakes. But you want to minimize to the best of your ability. It's another reason why we have so many laws of Shabbos. Right? There are 39 categories and hundreds of laws underneath these categories. Because anything similar to one of the categories is going to be forbidden. Why? So rabbis tell us so that you don't come to a Torah prohibition. And if you have to desecrate Shabbos, unless it's for saving a life or whatever, you do it in a way to minimize the desecration. right? We bring it down different levels. We do things in different ways or whatever in order to minimize that. Same thing over here. God wanted to minimize transgression. So he gave us the ability to guard ourselves against that. So therefore, God puts us in that direction to go in a roundabout way instead of going straight towards the Philistines. Because if you go straight towards the Philistines, it may cause them to want to go back to Egypt. Now, there are a few things here that that Maravir points out. Rav Agon Moshe Sternbach Shlita should be well. That he brings down like this. One idea is that one of the reasons they go in a roundabout way instead of going straight in the desert is because they don't want to see war. Right? And if they see war, then they may want to go back to Egypt. But above, if you look in chapter 3, verse 12, when Moshe Rabbeinu sees God in the burning bush, or he sees the fiery angel, God says to him, I'm going to take the people out, and they're going to serve me on this mountain. And this mountain is the way of the desert. So it's already clear God is going to send them that way. So if God's already clear, and it's already been made known He's going to send them towards the desert, and not directly in this way, why does that have to mention it? In other words, God over here says, I'm going to send them that way because they'll be afraid, they might have to go to war, they're going to want to return to Egypt, so I'm going to send them towards the desert. What do you mean you're going to send them towards the desert? We already know that. Right? Go back to chapter 3. It's already been made clear. Right? That was the question of the famous Chazon Ish, great Avram Yeshaya Karelitz, great rabbi in Bnei Brak of the last generation. He asked the question and left it, and left the question and didn't pose an answer. So Merebi says, what's a possible answer? Why would it be mentioned before? That God set up at the beginning do things according to nature. Why? Because if things are done according to nature, then the regular people, we're not talking the great tzaddikim, the great righteous people, regular everyday people, right? They left Egypt with the rest of the Jewish people, and they saw all the great miracles, right? They witnessed all the miracles. But what happened? They come out of Egypt. It's not like everything's hunky-dory, everything's great. They're in the desert. There's no food. And they have other problems. Like they turn around and they see the Egyptians coming after them. Not only that, there could be war. If they get too close to the Philistines, there could be war. They may want to go back. So at the beginning, Moshe Rabbeinu says that we're going to go serve God on that mountain. And even so, we're going to fight against nature to get there because we believe in God. Because we believe that, this is what we have to do. And our strength and our belief in Him is going to give us the ability, to do that. And therefore, they won't be afraid if they have to go to war. If that's next on the agenda, okay, so you want us to go to war. You want us to go to war, so we'll go to war. We just came out of Egypt. We're still, still have a slave mentality, to a certain extent. This is what you want, okay, so we'll do it. And then, even if they have to do that, right, they're going on a straight path, then they'll go straight into the land of Israel. But God says to Moshe, he testifies to Moshe, and he says, even though according to nature, if they would pass and come up to the mountain to get the Torah, right, that wouldn't be a contradiction. It wouldn't be a contradiction. Why? Because if things are done in a natural way. Right? We don't see things done in a natural way today. It's been a long time since that has been the case. Reason is because God has hidden himself. Right? There's a tremendous hiddenness of God's way. So here, even though according to nature he could have done it that way, right? And God knew from the beginning they were going to go through the desert. Nonetheless, there are other things obviously going on that could lead them not that way. Nature's an important thing. See, but it's not the only thing going on. God is nature. You take God out of nature, we go back to chaos. Genesis chapter 1. We all agree that's bad because no one would be here. God takes the Jewish people out of Egypt through miracles. Because according to nature, they never should have got out. But in this case, according to nature, if they go straight through, and they go in that path, then even if they do go to war, what happens after that? They go straight. They go straight into the land. Right? So it's not such a it's not such a contradiction. So we get to a bigger idea. The bigger idea is that even though God knows what's going to happen, past, present, and future, he knows where things are going to go. But even if he knows how things are going to go, we still have free will to make the decision. So God says, yeah, I understand. If they go towards, too close towards the Philistines, then what's going to happen is they're going to want to go back. They're going to have regret. They're going to be afraid of going to war. So I'll send them in a circle, so to speak, so that won't happen. So then you have the question, so why set it up that way? You know what man is going to do. You know what the future is going to bring. So set it up differently. It'd be easy for me to be God. I could say yes, no, whatever, but, I'm not God. So the idea is, so what if he knows what the future is? Man still has to go through the motions. And if man goes one way, then the repercussions will be like this. If man goes a different way, the repercussions will be different. If he goes a third way, then the repercussions are also different. It depends on what we do. But God knows what you're going to do. Yeah, but I still have to do it. We still have to go through the emotions. But there are actions. No one's putting a gun to anyone's head and say, do this or do that, or, you're in trouble. We're given the basic idea. If you do what I want you to do, God says, fine. If not, you'll pay the price. So, as we mentioned by Rabbi Rucham, God gives us the ability to guard ourselves. If we were on such a high level, this wouldn't even matter. It wouldn't even be a question. Because after everything they've gone through, and God is building us and building us and building us to be his nation, to be able to accept the Torah. If we were on that high spiritual level, so what if there's going to be war? Okay, so we'll go to war. If this is what we have to do, We have to fend these people off. We'll go to war. Make us even better, even stronger. Could have gone that way. God says, I'm going to work on their emunah b'tachon. They're going to have enough trials and tribulations in the desert. They don't have to be maximized. Right? I can give them certain things to go through. That'll be enough. I don't have to give them any more. Even though, according to nature, they could have done this and it could have happened, so what? We see plenty of things that go, quote unquote, according to nature, but it's really all miracle. Right? We saw last week in Parshas Bo, we flushed out that Ramban. That if you believe everything is a mikra, everything happens by chance, to the Jewish people, you have no portion in the Torah. So what looks like nature is really God behind the scenes in the first place. Go through the book of Esther. Right? You read Megillat Esther, as we will on Purim. God willing. God's name is not mentioned there at all. But his presence, if you read between the lines, and, we'll speak about Purim when we get closer. If you read between the lines, God's there the entire time. But you could look at a whole bunch of things as chance things, chance happening, and you put them all together, and then you get the whole story. But you see, we don't believe in chance things. That's Amalek. They believe in chances. They don't believe God runs the world. They don't believe God intervenes in history. So Jews don't believe that. See, you could read the book of Esther and get the wrong impression. Say, oh, look at the power of man. Look what they were able to do, overcome the odds. Yeah, but you look a little bit deeper, what did they do? They prayed. They had everyone pray for 3 days. And it was the whole thing how Esther got in, and she got to see the king, and she brought Haman in. And then at the very end, Haman is pinned on Esther's bed. He's pinned down by angels, the Talmud says. And he can't get up. But he can't tell Achashverosh because they're two of the same people. Achashverosh is no lover of the Jews either. They were two of the same people. He didn't want to kill him. But what can Haman say? Can Haman say, I got angels pinning me down? He can't say that. He doesn't believe in angels. People of Amalek don't believe in the supernatural. Killed by his own motto. Right? But there's so many things behind the scenes of what's going on. It shows there's divine providence. Even if he doesn't say anything himself or do anything per se to make himself revealed. We can see it in our own lives. It's totally not as revealed. But everyone has some things in their life where they say this couldn't have happened unless it was God. They have something in their life, something that happened. Whatever it is that gives them a glimpse into the spiritual world. You have to have the eyes to be able to see it, and to be able to understand it. Nonetheless, that's true chesed that God does. Because if he made everything so revealed, we wouldn't have free will. And God created the world not intending for us to be robots, but for intending for us to reach our true spiritual perfection based on our own actions, based on our own choices. You tell me God knows our choices and what we're going to do. That's true. But he's not acting for us. This isn't Geppetto and Pinocchio going doot, 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 doot. Right? We're not doing that. Hey, why'd you do that? Sorry, spasm. Oh, God's making you into a puppet. Look what he's doing. Well, you got free will. That's why you're responsible for your actions. That's why our actions matter. Because they have physical repercussions. They have spiritual repercussions. So here, don't be fooled. Don't be fooled that the Jewish people could have gone through according to nature. Nature is also miracle. You know, if God wanted to toughen them up, He would have had them go to war against them. But see, that far He didn't want to go. You know, that far, the question was how strong they would have been. And would they have said, which it seems the Torah says clear they would have, we want to return to Egypt even if they were tortured there and suffered there and whatever. You see, at the end of the day, not only what we do matters, but whatever we do has repercussions. And this is something no one ever wants to hear. Because, you know, how could it be? I did something wrong, you know, and then they have all, you know, all these ramifications. You know, forget about it, move on. You know, I made clear this to somebody recently. You know, something that happened a number of years ago. But they said, but it happened so long ago. I said, true. You're right. There's one major difference. And the difference is, you make the bed you sleep in. That means, if I do something, or someone does something, and let's just say for argument's sake, it's not a good thing. If it's not a good thing, there are ramifications. Again, something no one wants to hear. If there are ramifications in physical terms, then there are definite ramifications in spiritual terms. Right? That we've explained. We're not going to go into it further. But there's a real world out there. We make the best of it, good things can happen. We don't, we're going to pay a price. But make no mistake, what I do, no one should ever say it doesn't matter. Because if, God forbid, we do something against someone else, it is going to matter. And the repercussions will be whatever they are. So a person can't say, oh, look, it was so far in the past. What are you holding on to something? No, it's not holding a grudge. Holding a grudge is forbidden. It's not taking revenge. That's also forbidden. But if you do X, Y could happen. Repercussions. They're real. As everyone knows, or if you don't know, I'll tell you now. I also give conversion classes and Noahide classes. Take a look at my Facebook fan page at Beyond Orthodox Conversion to Judaism. You can also take a look at my blog, Rabbi Chaim Coffman. .blogspot.com, RABBICHAIMCOFFMAN.blogspot.com, and everyone have a great Shabbos.